Well, look, it's I'm really humbled to have Krishna East Forest joining us or joining me this morning for the Warrior Within podcast. I feel I've known Krishna for quite a long time, a number of years, albeit almost entirely virtually. But it kind of really began when I joined the East Forest Council. I find it such a incredible space, and I love what you're doing there. But just to take a little backward step, man, just to orient us, I'd love to know kind of where we find you right now physically, and maybe where we find you in terms of kind of what's alive for you right now.
I'm in Boise, Idaho at this moment, and I've been bouncing around a lot because we've been promoting this movie, Music for Mushrooms, which is coming out in U.S. theaters in just a couple weeks. So we're having its premiere in the United States in the fall of 2024, and then from there, we're going to try and take it to some other countries, hopefully Australia and Europe and so forth. But it will eventually be available online and that kind of thing. But that has been taking up a ton of my time. And I'm still releasing some music, still performing concerts. Just came back from Medicine Festival in the United Kingdom a couple, like 2 days ago. And so it's kind of been everything at once.
Yeah, man. I'm really grateful that you're able to find some time for this conversation in the midst of all that. And I guess you know, having launched a film now, that might have a kind of different energy to it than what you're used to. And I'm wondering how you're kind of
No.
calibrating to all of that.
It's one of these things where, like, I started it 3 years ago, definitely not knowing what I was getting into. And I don't know if I would have, I probably would have done it anyway. But I was naive. And my buddy Mark and I were shooting content. I think I was trying to redo, like, I had a video on my website that was sort of just like a little biographical 4 minute video, and it was really old. And I was like, oh, let's make a new one because he was getting into video and he kind of was trying to practice and get work. And I was like, sure, let's do that. And we started doing it, and it was fun. And I thought, oh, let's shoot this other thing, shoot this other thing. And of course, I naively said, oh, this is kind of like a documentary. We're kind of making a documentary. And he's like, sure, man, whatever you, if you want to shoot more, we'll shoot more.
Hmm.
So then we started shooting more, and then I needed more help. And then I brought John on, John Dahlgren, and then we shot even more. And then I was like, we need money. And because then you need, and then we raised some money from some wonderful people from our Patreon. And then when you have funding, it's a blessing. But then also I was like, oh, I actually need to, this has to be good and be finished now because I need to fulfill the investment of these folks. So then it got pretty serious because then it was like my buddy Lewis came on as the producer, and we had a lot of story consultants come on, and then we started shooting more and more and more. And then we had to hire an editor, and we got Rachel on board, Rachel Clara Reed, who's like MVP for the project, incredible editor. And then here we are, now we're trying to work on all the marketing folks and executive producers. And it's just been an incredible journey. Learned so much. It's been super fun, but it's really hard making a movie. I did,
Yeah.
I'm used to making music where I'm really in control of all of it. And a lot of it I can just be here and just make it and think about it and change it and I really am in control of that process for the most part. This was completely different where it's very collaborative, and there's people doing all these things that I don't know how to do and I can't do, and you really need them to do what they do. And then on top of that, telling a story and weaving it with picture and sound and words is tricky. It's so nuanced. You change little things. It's like a ball of yarn coming apart, and you're like, but now it doesn't have the right rhythm or feeling, and that was a really fun creative challenge, but one that just tapped into lots of different aspects of my interest creatively. And I majored in film in college actually, and I actually wanted to make movies way back, and I let go of that dream because I thought it was so collaborative. I was like, this is too hard. It's a mess. And then I kind of went into solo music because I was a bit of a like, oh, everyone will let me down, and I rely on myself and control freak. So this is a beautiful way of coming full circle, kind of stumbling back into a process, and then one day finding myself being like, well, look, you're making a movie and you wanted to do that, and now you're doing it and actually really enjoying. The thing I like the most about it is how collaborative it is. And
Yeah.
so it's been really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I was just all these questions were coming up in my mind as you were speaking, and then you kept answering them. So that was kind of nice. But it's what was most interesting to me to hear is it wasn't like 3 years ago you said, you know, I need to make a film and this is what it looks like. It was kind of this
I
kind of
know, it was a
slow,
discovery.
yeah,
Yeah.
organic kind of unfolding.
Yeah, but I've had a message or sort of an ethos or North Star with the whole East Forest project that's been developing over the years, particularly through these ceremony concerts where I would be speaking a bit more and give introduction and a bit of guidance. And through doing that, I was sort of discovering my own process about, what I'm trying to do and how do I language that. And then, and so the film helped me coalesce that in a way. Like, how do you then show that versus tell that? And how do you cultivate a feeling of that? Because you could make a doc where people just talk about it, it's kind of boring. And that was something I had to learn about the whole show versus tell. And that's tricky. And we made a commitment as we were shooting it to shoot a lot of verite stuff, which is essentially like real life.
Mm,
And we also were doing interviews with people. So it's a hybrid where at times in the film we are talking to people, but there is this story, this verite story going through it. And there's this saying in the doc world, like if you go the verite approach, if it works, it's amazing because it's like, it's like you're seeing things happen, and that's the showing versus telling. If it doesn't work, meaning you didn't capture the right thing because you don't know, it's just real life. You have a very expensive B-roll, and it just didn't work. Now you have a
yeah.
bunch of B-roll that took a lot of time and money to shoot. And
Mm.
so when you're trying to put all that together, you have to use what you have, but you're trying to weave it into this. Sometimes there's interviews and create a story that makes sense. Like the person's not like, why are they where? Who are they talking to? Or what?
Yeah, I imagine it worked. I mean, having watched the movie, I think it works beautifully like that. And I
It
especially
does
love,
work, but
yeah.
it was a process to get there, and where it might make sense to me, and then some people would watch it and be like, I get it, and some people watch it and be like, I don't get it. And
Mm,
you'd have to like read between the lines. I mean, it's crazy, man. I would send it to friends and people, like all sorts of people. You watched, all sorts of people watched it, and we wanted all this feedback. And you'd look for trends because people would say different things, but if you tried to zoom out, you could see like I think like it'd be crazy. Like men are kind of saying this, and women seem to be saying this, and older people are saying this, and you would see trends. It was wild.
yeah, that is, and also, me watching it is entirely. I'm watching it through the lens of actually knowing you, so that's an
Right. And it was
entirely
difficult for
different.
me to find people who are really green. And I'd
Yeah.
also want to find people who knew nothing about this subject, that kind of
Mm,
thing. And that was
mm.
like somebody's mom, or I'd be like, have your mom watch it, like,
What's the
oh no, she's
feedback
gonna.
there for someone who's, completely coming at this fresh?
We found that people who know this world, they love it, or people who are whatever. So they really into it. I made the film to be a bit of a bridge to the people who are like curious, right? And because there's a lot of those people out there, I didn't want to just make it for folks who are already into this stuff. And so I've noticed for a lot of those people, they find it really intriguing and it's curious to them and they like it. It might not be as big of a like two hands in the air, like, oh my God. They're just like, wow, it's a lot of like, I never thought there was such and such to it. I didn't know there was that much emotion or that could be that powerful. You're like, it's a discovery for them. So I think
Mm.
it piques their curiosity. And I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, I've been waiting for a film like this. This is what I've been wanting to send something to my mom or whoever, the skeptical friend. Like this is a really grounded, approachable, look into that world that is not very. It's not a lot you can argue with. It's just a good like you feel something. And so I
Yeah.
think for them, they're excited. It can be a bridge builder for them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And particularly here in Australia, I mean, obviously in the last year or so, we've had some big changes in the legislation around the use of psychedelic medicine. So I think there's been a real burgeoning of interest, particularly from people who maybe aren't as close to it and kind of have become curious through just looking at the changes there. So I
Yeah,
think this really plays into that space very nicely.
yeah, I hope so. So it's just been a wild journey, man, and I'm just excited to start sharing it with people. And the screenings we have done, it's been a real joy for me to be in the room. Like you're always just kind of doing it yourself, but to watch someone watch it for the first time. It's really
Mm,
cool.
mm. I think just kind of filling in the blanks of what we're talking about here, we've kind of mentioned this stuff in terms of what the film's actually about. So I'd love to know kind of your definition of what this stuff actually is.
I mean, inner work largely, but what does that even mean? It's just sort of saying like our introspection, psychedelics. I mean, the film's about psychedelics and music and community, and like, is this valuable today, or is it like part of the answer, perhaps, for us to thread the needle to get through this thing that we
Mm,
find ourselves in as a people, as a society?
mm,
That's the exploration of the movie. But this is a time of introspection, and I think that is the calling of this time, in this spiritual emergency that we find ourselves in.
mm,
And I believe that that is an invitation. And we're, in many ways, the fact that we're suffering from information sickness and everything's vying for our attention, is the stage is set quite perfectly for us to say, like, do I want the external anesthetized, or do I want to see what's going on like natively inside me? And how do I clear away noise so I know where the ground is and I know what my north stars are?
mm.
That's kind of that is the calling of our times. It feels like.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I noticed a little tagline on one of the images for the movie, which just said, the way out is in, which I think
Yeah,
summarizes that quite
that is the
nicely.
tagline. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm,
yeah. Um, it's just this idea that change happens from the inside out. It always has. It's the only way.
mm,
And so when we focus on a top down, like an election, for instance, it's not that that doesn't have consequence, but it's like that's not the answer. That's a symptom of from the inside out. And it's saying that, like, you are actually needed. Your inner process matters. As Ram Dass said, the real work is in the privacy of your own heart. And
mm,
it's to say, and that is important work. That's the ground level for change externally. Societal tides, shift through that internal process. So in many ways, it's trying to kind of turn the tables on the narrative that I think that we're being told very loudly right now.
mm. I think that's exactly right. And I love the way that you've kind of weaved that story in through the film, and particularly, looking at your own journey, which I think is um, you're very open in that film, and I love that because it kind of draws the viewer in to kind of feel into the openness inside their own heart, and I loved hearing kind of the story of your coming to music and everything that happened there in almost from your childhood, and so thank you for that, for starters, because now I often wondered,
Yeah.
coming to your music later, I'm like, how did Krishna get here,
Yeah, I mean, I learned again from the story consultants and learning about stories. Like, nobody wants, it's not compelling to watch someone on screen with answers,
Mm,
and definitely not the main character. It's got to be, you want to see struggle, and you want to see vulnerability or humor. And so that was a real guiding light for us to be like, look, it was a strange process, like directing this and being in it at the same time, because I was super objective about, like, it did not trigger me at all. Like, when I would get feedback and I'd be like, okay, do you care about the main character? What do you think? Is it bullshit? It's like I need to know. And if it's not sympathetic, you have to also have, for a long time, I didn't think I didn't want to be in the film, really, in a sense. Like, I was trying to hide in a way. And I was like, you have to have some kind of backbone for people to hold on to. Something and someone has to guide us through that we care about. And that is a vehicle for the story to go forward.
mm,
And I reluctantly eventually I realized that. And I was like, it has to be that way,
mm.
to serve the story. And so in that way, we were always looking for times where what footage do we have that shows challenge, struggle, vulnerability.
No, I'm glad you did, man. And like you said, it's not about um, the answers. Sometimes it's about asking more beautiful questions.
Right.
And I think that's what the film really did. And for me, it's like you've obviously very much found, well, at least finding your purpose. And it's like now I know there were these images in your youth which kind of really opened your heart. And I've always felt that going back to those images is really the way to find out who you're becoming and how you should be showing up in the world. And now I kind of have this, I don't know, it just feels different now, having watched that kind of path open up for you.
Well, I feel a bit nervous because, I spent those years where we're just in our internal process, me just being, okay, what do we need? Oh, we need this, we need that. I need to show myself, okay, I need more struggle. And then
Mm.
it's done. And I remember I was at one of the first pre screenings and I'm watching people watch, and suddenly I was like, wait a minute, this is very exposing of me
Yeah.
and my life. It's like, I totally forgot that, like, you know what I mean? Like, I was just so into the making part that it is a bit, nerve wracking. And I'm
Mm.
like, am I breaking through the spell too much? Like, people are like, oh, this guy's just a guy with a lot of problems. Like, I'm like, yes, maybe more than you. And it's just putting it up there. And so on one level, it's a testament of the time right now, like I said, I'm in my life. But it also, I was a bit embarrassed,
Mm.
by. But I
Well,
know it makes it a better film. But I'm also a little like, geez, now that's all out there.
well, show me a human that hasn't got their wounds, it's like it just
Yeah, I mean,
makes you accessible.
we've all felt all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, man. I think there was, yeah, I've felt it too a little bit, just even in conversations with people that I know others are going to be listening to in terms of my own story. There is a sense of it's an edge, right?
Probably nobody cares, right? People only care about themselves. It's like there it is, like what? Yeah, whatever, man. It's like we've all been angry, or we've all been,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, there's that moment in the film, when things weren't going particularly well around a ceremony, I think it was, and I actually loved that that was in there. That was for me like one of the moments that I walked away with.
yeah. It's probably one of the emotional climaxes in a sense of conflict.
Mm.
Yeah, and that was a terrible evening.
Yeah,
It was-
I felt
and
it.
I was right in the end. Like it did, people were upset.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, yeah. There's a couple points in the film that when I'm having to watch it for whatever reason, I skip those parts because for me it's a little too like close to
Yeah,
home,
I can feel
and I'm
that.
just like I don't want to watch that.
Was there ever a thought to take that little piece out, or was that always going to be in?
Always gonna be there. I mean, as long as it worked, like audio and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I just knew, like when we ask ourselves questions like what conflict do we have. I mean, I was like, well, that's very real,
Mm.
and it's hard to capture that stuff. I mean, there's so many things that happened even with someone standing there with a camera and afterwards I'm like, why didn't you shoot that? I mean, I can't be
Yeah.
like yelling at someone and be like, and turn the camera on. It's like you're just in this moment, and then like the next day you're like, why didn't you shoot that, man? He's like, I don't know, it just felt weird because it'd be too intense. And I'm like, well, you just got to do it. I mean, so we missed a lot of things that were real horrible.
Yeah, well, I guess you just got to leave it in the lap of, you know,
It's
the
probably
divine in
good.
some sense,
It's probably
It's like,
good, but we
yeah.
got plenty of things that were revealing. And after a while you get used to it, like because on that tour John was filming like all sorts of stuff, and we came here and shot at the house multiple times in our lives. And so I will enjoy not having a camera around or having that. Like I was just with Rada like the other day, we were walking around on tour, we're in a city, and I'm like, man, I'm so right now happy not to have that part of my brain going like, oh, should I shoot B-roll of that? And like,
Mm.
no, well, maybe we should grab an interview while we're in town. I'm like, nope, just gonna enjoy this trip.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it must be an interesting kind of separation, not looking over your shoulder all the time.
Yeah,
Mm.
I was always like thinking about filming stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, man, and in the midst of all this, you've still been producing music too. So, what's going on
Yeah.
in that arena for you right now? I've
So
noticed
we
all
have a
the featured, you're doing a lot of stuff with the Titanic music with guest artists
yeah,
and things like
my
that.
current record, music for the deck of the Titanic, its cycle is moving through. And we did the record, the deluxe record, and the reworks. Very proud of that record. It's a studio record. I think it's got a lot of amazing jams on there and some lyrics. And but with the film, there is a soundtrack, and the soundtrack, it comes in two forms. The first soundtrack is like 10 songs, and they're edited versions of these longer songs, and so it's a bit more digestible, and it's all new music that's in the film. And then after that is the sister album of that, which is a long form ceremony record. So it's a volume 3 of my soundtrack for the psychedelic practitioner series, and that is a over 6 hour piece that I've been working on for 4 years.
Mm,
That is my next like major psychedelic guidance album.
mm,
And so what's cool is that not only is a lot of that music in the film, but the album itself is the mechanism. In essence, we're talking about and exploring about this idea about music, mushrooms, inner work, blah blah blah. We're going, and then there's this thing. It's like, and then just like experience it.
mm,
Here is a tool that you can use that's new. So those will be the next like big works.
mm. So do you see that next piece as a I don't know, sequel to Music for Mushrooms? Is it something that sort of stands
Yeah,
aside and is a little bit different?
yeah, because that was volume one. This is volume three, and
Oh,
volume
okay,
two
right.
is
So
an
yeah.
album called In.
Yep.
That's 2 hours, and
Mm,
so this is like the third.
mm,
And they're all songs that were recorded and improvised in ceremonies.
mm.
So it's a very unique process of making that music.
Yeah, I love the way you do that. And that's kind of one of the special things about being part of the council is that you're so open with sharing
I've shared a
your
lot of it
music.
in the council already. Like we've
Yeah.
used tons of it. I'll kind of be testing it. Like I've been using a lot of it in those meditations we do live.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes when I have my stuff, we'll play that. But I've been lately because I've been working that record. One of the challenges of it is that the pieces it's such a long record that it's just very difficult to like work on it as a whole. It's almost impossible. You're just always working on parts.
mm,
And so you also want to listen to it and experience it in different shapes and sizes. So it's one thing for me to work on it here. It's another thing to like when I bring it in and use it in the council, I kind of hear it differently, and I'm seeing responses and hear responses, and so that's
mm.
helpful too.
Yeah, but I love the fact that for us as participants, we're almost part of the process, in terms of
Oh,
what's working, what's
100%. You
not
guys give me
working.
feedback. I see like, oh, this one's clicking, or like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I'll probably share the whole thing on there and ask you guys to like journey to it and like let me know how it goes and
Oh man, that would be
in due time for sure.
yeah, no, that'd be a privilege. And I guess, it's interesting. This might be kind of a clunky connection that I'm making, but I feel like in terms of your vulnerability, you don't. I love you as an artist in the sense that you're happy to just put stuff out there and see what sticks. With a group of people, even though it's a smaller group of people, where it's never just always the finished, perfect, precise product. You
But
know what I
that's
mean?
what I love about Patreon is like
Mm,
I was just talking about this with this other artist today actually. I was like I said because it's a smaller group and it's not like on the wide internet, you have
mm,
this freedom to feel like, well, it's not like for all time this will be searchable and
yeah.
it gives me the freedom to share all sorts of things that I wouldn't otherwise because I'm like oh, it's not done or blah 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 da da da. It's like no, it's okay. This is, and I like having an outlet. Otherwise, a lot of that stuff would never see the light of day.
Mm,
And I love that I can share it somewhere. I do a lot of live stuff. Like if I go, like I just came back from these dates in the UK, and I'm like, I was just today, like, okay, there were a couple cool moments, and I want to go find them, and I'm looking forward to like sharing it with Patreon.
yeah, that's so
The
cool.
whole
Yeah.
excellence ceremony, I'm like that. I wouldn't be surprised if that turns into something else in the future. But I just put the whole thing on
Mm.
Patreon.
Yeah, no, that's so lovely. And it is kind of sharing a part of yourself too, because I'm sure there are many artists out there who just wouldn't, that maybe that same sense that you felt about being vulnerable about your growing up and some of those moments might actually apply to certain artists as well, where they just wouldn't want even a small group of people seeing something that was a bit unfinished or they're not quite sure what to do
Yeah,
with.
maybe
Or,
it
yeah.
is more and more though. People are sharing, and we're also all trying to find ways to diversify.
Mm,
And it's a crazy world in the music business. So I think we're just looking for ways to have more direct experiences with communities and break down a lot of those walls.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, circling back to where we began with the council, I think what you're doing there is really unique and really special because it's not just about the music; it's also about the sharing and the community that happens around it, and the way you're kind of
Oh,
like able to,
100%.
yeah, and the way you're kind of able to kind of draw on what's going on for people in the moment, a bunch of people, and then something creative kind of appears from that. It's quite I love it.
It's nourishing for me too. Um, we have a nice little hearty group there,
Mm,
and it's been fun to track some people like yourselves over the years too. That's just a real privilege. So yeah, I know it's funny. I was like a little gift out of COVID, I suppose. It's
mm,
not something I was considering before, and I
mm,
only really the main reason I've kept it going is because I find it seems to be useful for people to just to have some shared witness and be in that process tracking together. And I'm like, that helps me be like, all right, this is sort of not just about me. I'll keep it going.
Yeah.
And we somehow seem to keep scheduling it every month. I find a spot that I can
Yeah,
fit it
man.
in.
Amongst all of that, to keep showing up for that is quite something. It's obvious, that it's important to you, and that resonates
Yeah.
in what happens in the actual space. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm. I feel like there's a couple of things that I want to ask you just to kind of fill in the blanks for people a little, because I know that you obviously there's a relationship there with Ram Dass and the work of Ram Dass, but I don't think I know where that originated and how that kind of became part of the path. Was there a moment or?
I mean, he was part of my path just as a teacher, from
Mm,
afar. And then
mm,
I think in 2018, I reached out to his organization, Love to Remember. I just pitched him the idea. It was the right time, right place, where I think other people had been pitching similar ideas. And part of my process was like I wanted to use other voices and feature them in the album. And so that, and I'd done some spoken word stuff in my work before. So I
mm,
had something to point to.
mm.
And thankfully they said yes. And then I went out there and recorded with Ram Dass in the summer of 2018. And it's kind of really cool that the film festival, our premiere is in Maui
Oh,
next
cool.
week.
That's great. Mm.
And it just feels perfect because, like, well, that's where Ram Dass lived, um, Maharaji. And so it's very much still like alive. And that's cool.
Yeah, I think that for me is probably the album that I come back to the most. Just listening to him speaking and listening to those words. It's something. Yeah, it's just amazing. I love that one particularly. But I wonder how was that time with him like for you, like setting aside the what was happening musically.
It was awesome and it was nerve wracking. I mean, at
Yeah, I
first I was
bet.
very nervous.
Mm,
I was very nervous, and I didn't know anybody in that world when I first went out there, and I kind of kept thinking it wasn't going to happen from either from his health or they would just change their minds. They were like gatekeepers as I got closer and closer. And Dasima is the last one, and she was like his day to day, and she's pretty tough. And I remember when I got there, I basically that was the last person I had to work with or convince. And she was very sweet. And actually, it's cool because like when we're going back to Maui all these years later, we're gonna stay with Dasima in
oh,
his old
cool.
house,
Yeah.
and it's now called Hanuman Maui. I believe it has a website.
Yeah.
It's a nonprofit, and you can
Mm,
go there. And it's his study is just how it was when I was in that room. That's what I've heard. It's the same with all the books and the pictures of the cats and Maharaji and his recliner next to the window.
mm,
Um, so it was really beautiful. And they were like, I think I got there on a Monday and I recorded with them on a Wednesday. And on Tuesday, they had a kirtan they invited me to. They do every week. And like, that's when I first met him. But there were all sorts of people around. And it was sort of like a faux pas happened socially where someone told me to sit next to him. And so I did. And then Dasima came up and was like, what are you doing? You're crowding Ram Dass. You need to sit over there. And I was like,
mm,
I didn't mean to. I was
mm,
told to sit here. And I was like
mm.
relegated to a corner. And I thought I'd blown it.
Mm,
Um, but it was just all love, man. And he was just loved telling stories. I mean, who doesn't? But he just I think he really loved the opportunity to take his time with the aphasia and sit in the recliner and just talk. I would ask
mm,
him a question, he would just go for a while, and then I'd ask him something else, and
mm,
it's really
mm.
special. Went swimming in the ocean. Went out
He
to
loved
brunch
that,
one
right? I
day.
see I see video of that all the time. He's got a huge
Yeah,
smile on his face.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I think it was every Monday they would go
mm,
out and swim in the ocean,
mm.
and a group would always come. That was always fun.
Yeah, yeah. It's you got I mean, also I guess in his twilight at that stage, certainly in this time, in this physical body, he would have been going deep in terms of, it feels like, what was coming out in the spoken word was so profound.
I believe that those recordings were the last recorded teachings.
Yeah,
So
I
the
was gonna
record
ask
you
you that.
hear is the last recorded teachings, which is I of course I didn't know that at the time, but that's wild.
Yeah.
So you're hearing kind of this guy at the peak of his wisdom.
Mm.
And the mechanism of recording him, putting it to music, so you're taking away the pauses, it was a technology that unlocked him.
Mm.
Right? It was no now long. In some ways, the pauses were an advantage because now I could just move phrases around.
Oh yeah, I
And
didn't even think of that.
oh yeah, dude,
Mm.
the song like Nature, right? That first song on the album probably took him at least 15 minutes to say that, and it's 1 minute of talking maybe
Mm.
one maybe. And when you're in there listening to it, you're kind of trying to follow along. Like, where is he going? But in his mind, he was tracking all of that. And when you listen to it in the music, it's just this beautiful little micro teaching with like the poetry at the start, almost a little joke in the middle, and then wraps it up. He did that time and time again. I mean, I think he did that, might have been that song. And then afterwards, I was just like, and he finally finished. And he looked over at me with this grin, and I was just like, mic drop. This guy's like, oh my God. And I said, that is so perfect. I said, that is perfect poetry. It's so perfect. And then he laughed and said, perfect, perfect. And was laughing. And that became the song Perfect, Perfect. That was just him laughing at me, telling him he was perfect, which he thought was
Uh,
hilarious.
that is really cool. Thank you for sharing that, man. And I imagine there's still some stuff it's which is still on the cutting room floor or in your archives, which is
Not much.
not much.
Uh,
No.
there was one song that it was so garbled. He was having a hard time about his LSD story. And we didn't quite get all of it. So that one's probably the only one.
Right.
And everything else I used almost everything I had. Like it
Mm.
was also cool that what I had was pretty much exactly 13, 14 songs. And
Yeah.
that was like a very complete album. So that felt very like this is what you were given to work with.
Mm.
And that's how I like to work. I don't like to decide. It was like this is what I have. This is what he said.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Does that kind of stand um above in terms of the most special project that you worked on or
I mean, sure.
yeah.
Collaboratively speaking, it was a big project 'cause it's a whole album.
Mm.
And of course, the piece that then a couple years later John Hopkins did that I worked on a little bit,
Yep.
"Sit Around the Fire," which is Ram Dass as well,
Mm.
has been also very special. Um, but yeah, sometimes collaborative things like that. I did a collaborative record with an artist named Peter Broderick, and it's an
Yep.
album called Burren that was probably like a peak creative experience for me. I've never had an experience like that where music just flowed out one week in Ireland and everything you hear on the record is what happened for us in the order it happened.
Mm.
It was just unheard of. And
So
so
tell me how that worked.
that's magic, you
Yeah,
know.
so what was the sort of seed for that? You guys just went out and
Peter, so we both grew up in Oregon but didn't know each other, and I was a fan of his music actually. And actually this is connected to Ram Dass. And then I wrote him like, I don't know, 15 years ago, just as a fan, like an email being like, I think your music's amazing and like you inspire me. And he wrote me back, which is rare, and just said, thanks and blah, blah, blah. And because of that, 10 years later, when I was doing the Ram Dass Reworks album and looking for artists to do remixes, I remembered Peter and I was like, I have his email. And so I emailed him and he wrote back and I said, you want to do this? And he did a rework. And then we did a couple podcasts, got to know each other. And then I had a gig in Ireland and I told him and he says, well, that's where I live. And he's like, why don't we do some recording? And so we decided to rent this house on Western Ireland out by it's a place called the Burren. And his only request was, let's not have a plan other than bring gear, no pre-writing. And I said, I love it. Let's do it. And we got there and it's like beautiful and it's this house and all these birds and this big rocky burren. You can see the ocean off in the distance and there's this ancient well outside where we get our water. And Peter loves to forage and he's foraging these little psychedelic mushrooms that, we'd nibble on. And it was just like all of this music just came out, man. 12 songs in a week, like 2 a day basically. And we didn't have an intention of, oh, we're going to use it all. It was just like, I don't know, we're just going to make music. And then when we were done, it just seemed like it all worked. And I've never, normally with an album, with Titanic album, I don't know, I wrote 50, 100 songs, and you end up with 10, 12. So you're hearing a real moment in time, and I feel like the land spoke through.
mm.
Literally, like you can hear the birds and all these things, and metaphysically into that music. And Peter's so talented. He plays everything. He plays beautiful violin and guitar and drums, and it's just a really stunning work, and I think it sounds cool. I did the engineering on it and mixed it with him, and I'm just proud of it. And I
Mm.
don't think a lot of people have heard it, and I just think it's a really wonderful listen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have obviously because I in the council, got spoken about often. So, but I'm definitely having heard what you just said. Then going to go back and listen
Dude, that
again with
first
new
song on
ears.
that record is one of my favorite. And
Really?
when I just played in Ireland like a week ago, Peter, um, I asked him if he wanted to come on for the encore, and we played that first song. And
Oh,
as soon
nice.
as we started playing it, I was just like, oh man, this. It's called Reunited because it felt like two like souls, and we didn't know it. And it's quick story. When I was driving to that house, you drive on the left side of the road there,
Mm.
which is extremely stressful for us Yanks, and you're like whatever.
Yeah.
But I was so stressed, man. I was like jet lagged, and I was in a terrible mood. It's like 4 hours, and I show up. We'd never met face to face, and he's outside, and I meet him. I'm all grumpy, and I'm like, well, we gotta set up all the equipment because I don't know if it works, and I just want to make sure everything works before we go to bed. And he's like, okay, man. So we set it all up, and there's a piano, and he sets up his little violin looping station, and I was like, all right, well, let's test the equipment. We'll just record something. He's like, okay. Hit record. I go sit at the piano. He's about 10 feet over here. He starts making exactly what you hear on the record, that violin pad. And I remember listening to headphones, and immediately just that first chord, we had no plan. And we played that song one time,
Wow.
whatever it was. And I remember when it finished, looking over at him, and I was like, oh my God, dude, this is going to be something special this week. And my mood was completely different. It was like a total release. And that was the beginning. And
Yeah,
we played it
man.
once, and you can hear it as the first song on that record. It's just reunited. I love it's simple, and it takes its time, but you can hear in it a kind of like gentle, loving wisdom, sort of singing to myself about, hey, calm down, you know, just it's medicine.
Yep, that's the word, medicine. I can't help but think, you come from one agitated state, and then there's this, there's a lot of things going on there. It's connection with another human being, it's music, it's
Yes,
collective creative expression, and all of a sudden, almost in an instant, you're just in a whole different place. Mm,
yeah. Music is magic,
mm,
So yes, to answer your question, there's the Ram Dass album was definitely been a peak, and I still play a lot of those songs live in different ways,
mm.
and it's been a highlight on the journey.
Yeah, for sure. And then something I'd say to Byron as well is I'm a huge fan of David White, the poet, and he does a lot of Irish walking tours in Ireland, and he speaks
Oh,
about
does
the
he?
Burren. Yeah, and he speaks about the Burren,
Oh,
and
cool.
and for me, I didn't know about this place only through his words, but I kind of that was it. And then so when I listened to that album and understood a little bit of the history, it was like all these different pieces coming together for me. It was quite special.
Yeah,
Mm,
Ireland is really so cool, man. The people are really amazing, really warm and grounded. Great audiences in Ireland. I've loved every show I've played there, and I
mm.
look forward to more.
Yeah, well, we hope to get you back in Australia. So, because
Me
that
too.
I first met you, I don't know how many years ago that was in Melbourne at one of your ceremonies in Melbourne. I can't even remember when that would have been.
It was 2020 because
2020,
I
wasn't it?
remember when I flew back. It was February, and there were a couple people wearing a mask. Like
Ah,
it just started in China, COVID, and I was like, "Look, wow, look at that!" And I remember like going through the airport, and there were like some concerns about like fevers and temperatures.
mm,
It was February,
mm.
um, so it was. And then I thought I was going to come back the next year.
Yeah,
It's
I
like, oh,
remember
do
we
this
we
every year.
yeah we shared a couple of emails on that, and it didn't eventuate. But man, I'd love it to have you back here. So I don't know. It's probably a bit hard to kind of look into the crystal ball at this stage. But so some of the sounds on some of your tracks are actually some of the nature sounds
Yeah, good
they're up
ear.
around my area. What right?
Yeah, you're right. Totally. We went up to Dunin and Byron Bay, and got some really amazing sounds. And I think I also went to this park that had all these kangaroos outside Adelaide, and they had amazing birds there too. To me, all the sounds were so foreign because they're
Yeah.
like crickets I haven't heard before, and like all these things. I'm like, what is that? And obviously, all the ocean. We had a great time.
Yeah.
Um, it's a lovely country.
I don't know if I'm stretching too far, but are there one or two song titles? Like I'm just thinking if anyone Australian who's listening and can you remember that actually have the native sounds of here on them? Can you remember song
Gosh,
titles? Probably not.
because I've used them a lot, you
Oh,
know. So I
okay.
mean,
Right. They're sprinkled
particularly, I
everywhere.
think if you listen to the ceremony stuff, I'm 100% they're in there.
Mm,
That's where I use more of it these days. Is a little less in the studio work, and but I use it a lot in the medicine world because it's just so effective and useful and helpful to have that kind of the chaos of nature, and it's a wonderful glue weaving through the music.
mm. And it actually kind of brings me back to the film because there's some lovely moments in the film when you're out in the field.
That's my favorite scene. Yeah, there's a field recording music making sequence right in the middle ish, and it's a great break from talking and that was actually something we added in late. I was inspired by a film called Coda about Riichi Sakamoto, and he's a wonderful composer who passed away a few years ago, Japanese. And there's a great documentary on him, and there's a lot of moments like that in the film of just that, like watching him gather strange sounds and making music. It's very patient, and I was like very inspired by that. I was like,
Mm,
yeah, we need that. We need something that shows again that process versus talking about it.
mm. Where were you when you did you might have said in the film, I can't recall. Where
That
were you?
moment, that
Yeah.
that was just here in the hills outside
Okay.
Boise. So
Mm,
yeah, that was fall, and so it's normally a ski kind of area. Up, it's about 30. It's not far. I
mm,
just wanted to get up in a forest, um, and yeah, it's just up the hill basically.
mm. Wow, man. And so, once all the dust settles on the film, the next thing is kind of what polishing off volume three. Is there some other things in the works that you could speak to?
Well, I am polishing that off. I'm almost done with it, the mastering, and
Mm,
then we have to figure out artwork and all that jazz. But
mm,
there's a lot of extra content with the film. So there's going to be soon an opportunity when you go to musicformushrooms.com that you could watch like all the interviews or lots of musical tools and meditations and talks. So it's like a deep dive education wise and experiential. So I have to finish all of that, and that's almost done. But I haven't quite been able to the next direction of like my next studio work. I'm not sure.
mm,
And even like this ceremony album I was referencing that's coming out soon and the soundtrack, I do know in some ways it's going to be my last because, or at least in that way, I feel like I've wrung out the towel on that particular process many times now, and each time I'm still kind of surprised by what comes out, but I feel a yearning for a new approach, and I don't know what that is
right.
or how that will look. It's a bit challenging because when I'm playing shows, I don't usually have much time where I can really like put it down and reinvent. I'm always like in 2 weeks I have to go do something else, and you have to do the thing, and so I don't have a lot of time to like reinvent the whole system. It's not as simple as like just pick a different instrument. It's also like, well, how do you logistically then travel with it? And I have different types of gigs, and I have to do the job.
Mm,
So
mm,
I don't know. Um, so that's a bit of a process,
mm.
but it'll unfold.
Do you have, you have so much going on in it. Do you have moments where there's just you're able to kind of take some time and do nothing in a way and just kind of allow something else to come through?
Yes and no. This has been a particularly busy time because of the film, and I have this land I'm trying to develop in southern Utah,
Mm,
and that's been crazy. I've been doing that too. And when I say that, I mean I go down there as soon as I'm home. I'm like I have 10 days. I get in the car, drive 10 hours down. It's backcountry land. Sleep out of my truck, swing a hammer all day, and try to build this thing. And if I didn't have that and I didn't have the film, I'd have a lot more time.
yeah.
But the
Yeah.
film, it's one of those things like once I started, it's like, it has to be finished. And it's just been such a massive project. So we'll get there. But
Mm,
this has just been go time.
mm,
And my hands are on most parts of it. I mean, this is the only project I've worked on where I'm not even fully informed on every aspect of what's going on with it right now. That's very new for me.
Yeah, man.
And let alone, controlling it or directing it. I'm like, I think there's a such and such that someone else is working on with that person. And
How does that feel?
on one level, great, but on another level, it's difficult medicine for me because I'm someone who likes to be managing everything,
Mm,
or putting a creative stamp on something or whatever it is. But I can't on all of this.
yeah.
But I think it's great to let stuff go and lean into, again, a team process
Mm,
and people bringing talents to the table far beyond anything I have. And that's wonderful.
mm,
Big things are never done alone. You can't, the bigger something is, the inevitability that, of course, it takes different people. That's how it is. And that's been a wonderful discovery for me. And it's been a living process into that.
Yeah, yeah, I like hearing you say that because that's medicine for me too. I've always found it hard to let go of wanting to do everything myself. But you're right, you limit the creation.
Yeah. And if it's larger than yourself, this is, I've been always trying to keep it being feeling mission oriented or movement
Mm,
oriented, and trying to reorient myself, like, what is our mission and what is the thing we're serving? And that way it's much easier for groups of us to work together because we all share a mission or values, as opposed to, something promotional or whatnot.
mm,
And I think that's ultimately what's inspiring people when they watch it. I hope is that they feel, beyond any elements of my own story, that's again ancillary or serving this larger subtext of all of our work. I'm just like, and as other people in the film share their stories and they're showing their process, and hopefully you see yourself in the film is the idea, and you see a sense of kinship that, oh, my thing that I thought maybe was just me, I'm seeing it, and that's giving me encouragement, motivation, essentially inspiration. We want to
mm,
inspire people.
That's beautiful, brother. And I'm very grateful that I actually get to see myself literally with my one line. So
You're in it,
unless
man.
that hit the cutting room floor in the final
Nope.
edit, I don't know.
No, that was a really, and your little line is actually a great little turning moment. It was very useful,
Mm,
where one thing is being said and then you kind of pivot it, and then that takes it to that was so good. And it's funny because, like, the editor and people working on the film don't know, and I was like, oh, I know these. I was like, I tried to be objective. It's like I didn't want to push it, but I was like, I hope Asher makes it, and you did.
Yeah, I saw a couple of people that I recognized, and I definitely heard the familiar accents. And then I'm kind of looking, do I know this person? But I don't think there was
Yeah,
anybody familiar. But it was great to hear some accents from the South. Yeah, the Great South,
yeah,
should I say?
yeah. It's cool. I know.
Yeah.
And when I came down to Australia, that one time, I was shocked that there was like people down there. It's always like I've never been there, and
Mm.
you're just like, we have a community down here. This is amazing. it's,
Yeah,
it's
man.
like,
Yeah, it's actually something I wanted to ask you about how you felt about that because I mean, from me sitting here in Australia and the other side of the planet from you. I mean, I hear you're around, man. You're like, it's
well,
not just my
I don't know. How would I know? It's like, and
yeah.
you don't know. It's on a leap of faith when you kind of head out on
Yeah.
something like that.
But how does
So,
it feel just knowing that and I'm sure you've heard it from others just from me that you have a big base of people down here that listen to music. Is that I mean how does it feel?
it feels great when you say it, but really, it's just an idea in my head. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things, like, it isn't. It doesn't. It's just an idea in my head, and in a lot of ways, you have to kind of check a lot of that stuff because you know, I don't want to feel puffed up, or what does that mean? But on a
Mm,
practical level, when you're trying to decide to go, you're trying to be like, okay, I mean, is this going to make sense, to go? Um, More than anything, especially as an artist, there's no greater feeling of gratitude and humbleness to feel that anyone is listening or watching the thing you made and it has meaning for them. I mean, that's
mm,
like the greatest thing in the world.
yeah.
It's the greatest job in the world to be able to make something creatively from your heart, and even one person is like, man, that touches me. And you're just like, wow, that's so cool, because it's the old golden rule. Like, if you want to feel um held, make an album called Held, and which
Oh
I
man, I
did.
love that.
And then
Yeah.
it's like now I feel held because other people feel held, and it's like, oh, it's you give what you're looking to receive.
Yeah. How good
And
is that? You know,
man, is that it's so beautiful.
yeah, you reminded me of Ram Dass. I think he said something along the lines of, he'll stand up and speak to hundreds of people, but if one person is moved, or if one person goes home and behaves differently as a result of that, then his job's done.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, and all the time, like anytime I get in my fucking process about like, I play some show and I'm all like self-loathing and
mm,
or whatever, and I'm in this whole thing about what didn't work, and then inevitably one person sends a note or tells me something about like, you played this one song and I had this vision of my brother that died, and they tell
mm,
me this, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm making
mm.
this all about my process, and I'm in service. Of
Yeah.
course, I have to remind myself of these larger processes that are weaving through all of us,
Mm,
and I'm playing a role in that. I'm not changing anyone, but when you hear that feedback, it is quite useful to remind yourself, like, um, what you're really doing.
yeah, man. It's you're soundtracking people's inner journey, and that's just, you know,
Yeah,
sacred.
and that's humbling because I've been on those journeys and where
Mm,
I'm testing my own records and I'm the guy being like, "Please help me," and then the music
mm,
helps me, and I'm like, "I don't know who made this, but
yeah.
thank God." And I've felt the same thing, and so, man, I've been leveled in that way and humbled, where I'm just like, I don't understand what that is that comes through. What is the creative force for all creativity?
Mm,
But I know that in a sense, how we're all one, it's something from that other part of the tree,
mm,
coming to all of us through us in different forms, in infinite forms of creation.
yeah.
Conversation is part of it, everything, all of our thoughts. But art in itself are these grander flourishes of it that are just beautiful for the sake of beauty, for the sake of celebration of spirit, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
That's more that
Absolutely.
that is the enough. Like that's
Yeah.
the sitting around the fire together for eternity, singing songs, telling stories, witnessing. That's all there is.
Yeah. I think yeah, I don't know if you know the mythologist Michael Mead. He talks about song as it carries the burden that we can't carry alone.
Yeah. Michael's great. Had him
Mm,
on the podcast a long time ago. I should
yeah.
reach out to him again.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, which has always stuck with me that, this is too heavy for me, but the song can carry it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I really hope and pray that we have a future where music continues to play an intentional, useful role and it
Mm,
doesn't just get washed out. It
yeah.
will. It will continue to be important for us to hear things that were hard to create by humans.
Mm.
I hope we will not lose sight of the value of challenge and listening to something that was difficult to make.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, thanks, brother. Look, I really appreciate this conversation so much. I know, you've got a lot going on at the moment, and to take a moment out to step to the side and have a chat with me, I'm really honored. So thank you. I wonder just, handing it back to you for a sec, like what's the best thing to do for people to kind of find out about the film, everything else?
Musicformushrooms.com
Mm,
or eastforest.org and sign up, join our journey, share your stories. It's going to be a conversation for a bit of time. And I think we're going to share a lot more content on social media that's not in the film. We shot so much stuff, 200 hours of footage and amazing conversations and moments. So there's a lot to share and discuss. Check out the council on Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest if that interests you. And go to your local theater, call your local theater and say, hey, I want to see this film there. And that'll help us get it to Australia or anywhere in the world. And there's even a little feature right on the front page of the website where you can request a screening, and we're keeping track. And then it helps us know where there's kind of some heat, and it would be a good place to try and make it happen.
mm, mm.
Because seeing it together in a group is special. It really is, and it's the best sound and the best picture, and it's that in itself is an experience to be with a group, feeling together and feeling community. So we really want to lean into that while we can.
Mm, mm. Well, thank you, brother. it's just an honor being connected to you and knowing you're out there doing your thing and you know the fact that your music's there for me anytime and I love that, man. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for the support over the years, and I'm happy to be here.